Some of the episodes of the Human Together podcast are issues, concerns, and people that intersect with my own life. That is the case with this episode, in which we focus on a disorder that affects millions and one that is not apparent on the surface. Today's episode focuses on dyslexia. A few days before my 5th grade school year, my mom had my older brother take me to school to enroll. Walk to the school with your little brother and help him enroll for the school year, or something to that effect, is what she told my brother. My brother is 3 years older than me, and this charge must have made him feel honored, knowing that he would act as my pseudo-parent for the day. We made the short trek to school, and my brother and I stood in line and completed all the formalities. My brother filled out all the paperwork, and we were out the door, no problem. "How'd it go?" my mother asked my brother. With his chest puffed out and feeling like a proud father, he replied, "Great, he's ready to go, and his schedule is set for the 5th grade." I filled out all the paperwork for him. Beaming with pride, my mother could not have been prouder of my brother. The feeling was mutual, as my brother grinned from ear to ear. Advanced to the first day of class, and the first thing my teacher does is call roll. She went down the list of students, some familiar, some not so much. As she went down the list, she called out, "Sason Floyd." "Oh, cool. Sounds like we got a new student. Sounds like a foreign kid. Maybe he's from somewhere cool, like Finland." "Sason Floyd," she called out again. No answer. "Maybe he's from Cameroon or some other far-off place. That'd be awesome," I thought to myself. "Sason Floyd," she called out again. No answer. She pulled the enrollment card and read more information to identify what I hoped was our new student from a far-off land. She announced to the class, "Floyd, it says here your dad works at Jickory Frames." It was in that instant that I realized I was Sason Floyd, and my mom had made a huge mistake letting my dyslexic brother enroll me for school. I raised my hand and ducked my head. "It's Jason Floyd, and my dad works at Hickory Farms," I said. She quickly corrected the mistake and moved on, but the social damage was done. Fortunately, it did not affect my already depressed social standing. The kids shortly forgot about the incident, and I moved on. Did I tell my mom or my brother about the incident? No way. I was not about to throw my brother under the bus, so I maintained his dignity and left him with a feeling of accomplishment. We joke about the incident as I retell it to my family today. Was my brother stupid or have a low IQ? Absolutely not. In fact, he is and was highly intelligent, as is the case with lots of people who suffer from dyslexia. However, he has a learning disability in which he mixes up letters and words while he's reading and writing. In most cases, people with dyslexia can read very well, yet find it extremely difficult to spell or write. A majority of kids are identified as having dyslexia by the age of 5 or 6. I remember fondly how my mom would help my brother with reading. Endless hours were spent at our kitchen table. At times, I thought my mom was part sorcerer and part snake oil salesman. She tried all kinds of things she had read about to help my brother read and write better. One time, I remember her doing something with a tennis ball tied to a string. My brother would watch the ball as my mother swung it back and forth. He had to watch the ball with his eyes and not move his head. Crazy sounding, I know, but my mother would have done anything to help my brother. It may seem like quackery at times, but who am I to question my mother? Moms know best, so I left her to her magical ways. Today, there are a lot more resources for kids with dyslexia that don't involve a string and a tennis ball. Parents still want to help their kids as my mother did. Nowadays, there are an abundance of computer and online resources. I recently sat down with someone that developed a technology to help people with dyslexia, Pierre Liebenberg. Pierre, like my mom, has a son that is affected by dyslexia and wanted to help him. Welcome to the Human Together podcast show. So my first question is, tell me a little bit about your son.
My son, he is 10 years old now, or I should rather say he's about to turn 10. When he was in the 2nd grade, we noticed that he was really struggling with his reading. We try to take an interest at home and, try to, sort of help him learn to read in addition to what was happening at school. His older brother had taken to it pretty easily, but he himself just wasn't showing the same kind of progress. I used to be a teacher myself. I taught high school English. Some of the signs of what to look for. I wouldn't say I was an expert. I started noticing a few things. Some of the classic signs. He had trouble writing, switched letters and words around. Had a little bit of a non-recticity in the way he pronounced his R's and that kind of thing. And so I noticed this, and I said to my wife, I think we need to, just have this looked at. And we took him to a specialist, and they had him evaluated. And it came back that they diagnosed him with dyslexia. We weren't, surprised about this at that point. The question then was, now what do we do? And so we started looking around. What kind of services are available? What can we do to help him with this? It turns out there isn't a whole lot around in Oklahoma, unfortunately. At least at the public school level, the word dyslexia as a learning disability is apparently not recognized. In our conversations with teachers and school administrators, they didn't even use the word dyslexia, which I think, speaks volumes. We were then in a situation where my son, he was in a position where he really wanted to do something initially. The more he struggled with it, the greater that struggle became. And I think what was probably the biggest result of that, or the biggest negative result, was that his self-esteem just plummeted. Whereas initially he at least showed some willing, and he, was involved. He just withdrew from reading. He didn't want to do it. He became angry and frustrated. There were other sort of behavior issues that developed as a result of that. What made us particularly, sort of heartbroken about it was that, he couldn't participate in things at school that required any kind of reading. This was anything, from a school play or simply just, getting up in the class and reading a passage from, whatever book it was that they were reading. It got to the point where he basically stopped trying. And that's when I decided that we really need to do some kind of intervention, something, that is beyond the services that we could find here.
And so how did he do in the other subjects? What did he have? Was he academically able to perform in the other subjects?
He wasn't. He fell behind pretty quickly, and it just sort of steadily continued. Math in particular was hard for him. Some of the other subjects, once he could process the information that was given to him, usually in a verbal format, then, he was fine. I say fine, but, fine was what we found acceptable at the time, given the struggles he faced. But he definitely, he did not enjoy school. There were some behavior issues that had cropped up as a result of that. I think the thing with children is that they very rarely express their emotions, frustrations in the same way that you would expect an adult to. And so it manifests in other ways. And, we became very aware of that pretty quickly.
And I'm assuming that he had probably above average IQ, a lot like my brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there were no concerns there. He certainly was a bit of a later bloomer than his older brother was, but he's also 2 years younger than he was. So you can't really judge, the one's performance by the other, even though I'm sure all parents do. Certainly, there was no reason for us to suspect that there was anything else going on.
This led you to develop some new technology. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I transitioned out of teaching English into tech industry. And I initially started work as sort of a project manager / UI designer. I'm entirely self-taught. And at that time, I wasn't really doing any kind of programming or anything like that beyond basic HTML, CSS used for web pages or web apps, that kind of thing, and maybe a little bit of JavaScript. I sort of looked around. I try to think, what is there that we can use that we have that could help him. And very often if there's some kind of a problem these days, you hear people say, well, there's an app for that. Unfortunately, there wasn't one. There are a few apps on the App Store at the moment that claim to Dyslexia. I can't really comment as to whether they do or not, but they didn't meet our needs. So I figured, this is a solvable problem, at least as far as making an app is concerned. And before I embarked on that, I bought the prototype. I used Apple's Keynote software that you can use on a Mac. And I read up a little bit about dyslexia and some of the interventions and, strategies that do work and help readers who struggle with it. And I started, building basically a slideshow that only showed him and my son one word at a time. And he would focus on that word and he would try to read it. Once he got it right, with or without help, we would move on to the next one. And that seemed to work. It was fairly promising. And so I decided, I'm going to have to find a way to get this into an app format of some kind onto an iPad. And, at the time, I was basically typing in individual words and having them read for them, so that wasn't sustainable. So what I did is I started learning Swift, which is Apple's new programming language, which was released around about 2014. went online, looked around for courses on Swift and iOS development. And my wife works as a selector. She does collection management at the downtown library in Oklahoma City. Turns out that if you're a member of that library system, then you can have free access to lynda.com, which is one of those tutorial sites where you can do courses in just about anything. And so I lined up a few of those courses and started working my way through them. About 9 months later, I had put the app together. There was a lot of trial and error, and my son was sort of sitting next to me as I was doing it, and we would test things out, and he would give suggestions, and so it was sort of I had direct access to a feedback loop, which was great. The end result is an app called Lexico. He has been using it since day one. About 5-6 months ago, he had progressed to the point where his reading scores have doubled. And about 2 months ago, they put him back at school. They put him back into the mainstream for reading as well as math. So we are. It is absolutely astonishing. We are so happy with it. And his motivation is back. He now reads by himself, and it's all his motivation is all intrinsic. He has worked his way through all of the Dogman books, and he's busy with another series at the moment. And we've now reached a point where he would go to the school library and he would check books out, and he'll bring them home and he'll read them. And he's actively seeking out reading, which is something that we would never have imagined was even possible when he was first diagnosed.
Well, that's got to make you thrilled not only as a parent, but potentially other people that can use the app. Have you gotten any feedback from other parents like yourself that have used the app?
Yeah, I've gotten a little bit of press, and I think that's sort of put the word out. I know that at least one school system has installed the app. I don't really have numbers available since value user privacy there pretty highly, and so does Apple's App Store, and so you can't really get good access to good numbers. But I have had some feedback from parents who have used it. They mentioned that it is working for them. So that of course is something that feels is immensely satisfying, and on a personal level, and I guess on a sort of an altruistic, where there was nothing before, and now there is something that is making a difference in someone's life. Just to have had that opportunity to do that is something, for which I'm very, very grateful.
That's a neat story about your son and how you developed the app. What does the future hold for your son? What are some of his dreams, and how can those be carried out because he's able to read now? That
is a good question. I suspect that he might end up being a writer. I don't think he thinks that at the moment, but from what I've seen, he's definitely got some kind of an affinity for it, I should say, or at least he's developing one. He's very focused on story at the moment. It's just remarkable to me that he initially, when he was making some progress, quiz him to try and see, he might be reading these words, but is he actually understanding them? Now, if we're driving, if I get him from school, he will basically recite to me every single thing that happens in the novel and why it happens and, what it means. And so he's not only reading, but he's reading with comprehension as well, right? Which is the best of both worlds. And I think he might end up either doing some kind of a writing or being, he's pretty interested in film, and especially the horror genre. He might well end up doing something creative and somewhere in that space. But that said, his mathematics, he's really improved at that as well. So I don't know that there are really any limitations at this point to what he can achieve.
Well, it sounds like he can do just about anything he puts his mind to, in part, I think, because of the app that you've developed. For my listeners, tell us one more time the name of the app and where it's available at.
Sure. The app is called Lexico. That's Lexico. It is available on the App Store. That's the iOS App Store. Currently, it is available only for iPad. I'm pretty close to finishing up the iPhone version, and I'm hoping to release that pretty soon, somewhere in April. They can go to, if you want to find out more, you can go to lexico.app. That's the website. There's some information about it there. You can then follow a link from there to the App Store and download it.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing the time with us. I think there's lots of my listeners that can maybe take hold of this technology, someone just like your son. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Pierre's son, my brother, are joined by the likes of Whoopi Goldberg, Cher, Henry Winkler, and Albert Einstein, all geniuses in their own right, who overcame dyslexia. We understand their triumphs towards victory, And maybe we've all taken it a little bit step further to be human together.